Good. I brought plenty of tape, so I don't have to
that's
worry.
good.
have to
You can
worry
always
about that.
rub it out, can't you?
Sir,
You
oh
can
yeah,
rub
I
your
can
tape
always
out.
check it out. That's right. Well, I'll tell you, the three main areas that I'm interested in are, first of all, the blackout and the effects that it had on the people. Secondly, of course, the evacuations, if you were affected by them. I'm sure you know many people that were affected by the evacuations. And thirdly, well, the rationing and the cost to you, the average citizen, you know, what it cost you, how it affected you, and that type of thing. And if it's all right, first of all, I'll get into the evacuations of mainly it was children, I understand. Did you have to take anyone in, any boarders in, or did you have to evacuate
We didn't
yourself?
have to, but it so happened that we lived near a militia camp. There's a militia camp in our village because just prior to the war, they conscripted the young people into the army. And they had well, there wasn't many conscription camps, but this was one of them. And it was within 3/4 of a mile of where I lived. And there happened to be a soldier over there, and his wife was ill or something.
But they were bombed.
Yeah, they were bombed in London, or somewhere in London. His child may have been evacuated, I'm not sure about that, but anyway, he was in dire trouble. So we took in one of his little boys, and we had him, I can't say how long, do you know?
6 months, I think.
Yeah, so that was the only time that we...
No, we had the lady and the little boy.
Oh, yes. And then there was a soldier's wife, and they asked us if we could house them for a while, and that was the lady and the little boy, wasn't it?
Yes, the baby.
And I don't know how long we had then, do you?
The Battle of England.
Yes.
That's what we know as the Battle.
The Battle of Britain was on
Britain,
then.
I mean, that's right.
That's right. Yes.
Well, being that you lived just north of London, did the Battle of Britain reach your hometown?
Yeah.
Direct.
Started over it.
My goodness, was your home ever hit or
Yeah.
nearby?
Yes. I had a bomb drop right in my garden, about 20 feet from the brick wall of the house. It's a 2-story house, but of course it's beyond where you need to go.
Yes, sir, that is, but
October
it
40.
interests me anyway.
October.
Where were you at whenever?
I was outside when he started to unload. There used to be a lot of controversy during the bombing. Well, during the first months that you're interested in,
Yes, sir.
there was some enemy aircraft around, mostly we think on reconnaissance, see? Well, as soon as an enemy aircraft came into the area, we would get an alert, which was the sirens would blow, and everyone would have to take cover, unless you were on a air raid warden's duty, you see. And then if you were a warden, you were detailed off for a certain section of the population, and it was up to you to see that everybody was under cover while the alert was on, and they stayed there until the alert was over. Everybody in England practically knew that there would be a war. None the more for the Munich affair, you know, that Mr. Chamberlain went over and signed an agreement with Hitler. And we were prepared for war. In the radio, on the news, everywhere, papers, we were prepared for war. We had a member of Parliament, which you know of now as Winston Churchill, more or less in the background in those days, and disliked by a lot of people, of course, but eventually what he kept saying proved to be right. We had war. And eventually, after Dunkirk, of course, he was made Prime Minister. And from then on, we didn't look back. I mean, he was a great man. You heard of John Bull of England? Well, he was one of those types with his big fat cigar, and he gave everyone great courage. He'd come on the radio from time to time and encourage the people. And
Magnificent voice.
yes, oh yes. He said we would fight the enemy on the shores, in the fields, in the cities, in the streets, and in the air. He said we would annihilate them, which eventually we did. Well,
now, as you, yes, sir.
first of all,
Yeah,
the top part, you see, after Dunkirk, invasion was imminent. We all thought invasion was imminent. You see, because we'd got nothing. When our expeditionary force left France, all our little fishing smacks and all the small boats went over and got what they could, but they had no equipment at all to bring back. They couldn't bring it back. They didn't have the facilities to bring it back. It was all captured by the enemy. Public meetings were called by the general staff. You know, the general staff, that would be come under military, and they sent their personnel around to all the towns, villages, and we were instructed on what to do if invasion came. There would be notices posted up all over the place, and something what was said was what to do, how to do it, and the part that you must play if invasion happened. Well, of course it didn't happen, but we had to take these lectures, and lectures on gas and on this invasion, you know, if a paratrooper come down, what to do and how to do it, and ignore rumours. It was emphasised over the radio that we knew the sound of our radio announcer, because if such a thing as invasion happened like it did in Europe, the Germans took over the radio stations and started false propaganda or to upset the civilian population, see. So we were prepared for that. We knew that as soon as we heard an announcer on the radio, he'd announce his name, so we got to know them, so that we would know if an enemy had taken over the radio station. That was the idea. If a strange voice come on, you see, you'd have to, what we would call, use your loaf.
Well, this was not until after Dunkirk that they began taking these precautions?
That's right, mainly after
Did you
that.
personally believe that invasion was imminent?
No.
You
No.
thought that the British fleet could...
No, I didn't think the British fleet could hold them that much. I don't... What I think... This is my version
Yes,
of what
that's
I
what
think.
I want.
That things move so fast in about... I don't know, in 6 or 8 weeks, France capitulated. Maybe less than that time. I'm not sure now. Belgium capitulated. And therefore Hitler's armies come right over to the channel ports of France, Calais, Dunkirk and so forth. Well, we, the general public living in that area, we did not think that there would be an invasion. We did expect a few paratroops to come round and dislocate the communication lines and things like that. We did expect that. And in that respect, an LTV was formed, a local defence volunteer. So if you were capable and you were fit enough, you sort of joined an army, and you were issued with uniform, with a rifle, and you had the proper training, more like a soldier. So that everyone who was capable of doing something for the war effort was more or less conscripted into the one service or the other. In some cases you had your choice. You could be an air raid warden. Like I was an air raid warden. I worked in a big factory, the electrical factory, one of the main companies in England in those days. Crompton Parkinson, it's like a Westinghouse company is over here. You know? And when the war first started, when they declared war, we had to have precautions in the factory because you've got to turn out the goods. You see, you've got to keep the factories working. Well, now we're going back to the start again. I think we must have this in, because when war was declared on September the 3rd, we had an air raid warning in our village within a half an hour. And that's a warden coming round on a bicycle blowing a whistle, because we didn't have a siren, but they had the sirens in the town and we could hear them 4 miles away. In matter of fact, we could hear them all up towards London, perhaps 12, 15 miles away. When you got a warning at night, you could hear all these combine, all these sirens. I like your police siren, a very shrill note, and it went on for a certain time, you know. And that was all regulated in case of invasion and the enemy took us. So we knew how long the warning would last. And we got used to sound and everything. Then when the all clear came, it was the same siren was used and it was intermittent, up and down, you know. On the alert, it was one long shrill. Is that right? No, you're wrong, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Yeah, so there was two. You had an all clear and you had the alert and you had the all clear. Because I worked in this air raid warning. It was a false alarm. There's an aircraft over, but it happened to be a false alarm. Nothing happened. But still, it was good training for the wardens to run around on bikes and see that everybody got in the house, you know.
Did you know that it was a false alarm? Did they tell you?
No.
Oh, you thought it was the
You're
real
told to
thing.
take cover, and you've got to take cover.
This was initiated by the government?
Oh,
The
yes.
government did
Yes.
this on purpose?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everyone rushed for the gas masks, you know.
I don't think the false alarm was initiated. It was just a false alarm. It was official.
Oh, in other words, someone did believe that a German reconnaissance plane or something
Oh, yes,
came by?
because we had to get our messages from headquarters.
Oh, I see.
You see,
I see, yes.
or the wardens did,
Uh-huh.
like the head of the Home Guard, the officers in the Home Guard. Well, anyway, it proved to be false. On the Monday morning I went to work, and I was stopped within 100 yards of the works by the works personnel, the head security officers, who eventually turned out to be firemen, because we had so many fire bombs dropped in that sea that security officers they were firemen. First of all, they were security officers, then they were firemen, and they were very important on the works, you know. I was stopped with a lot more. I'm going to work on my motorcycle, and the alert was on. I heard it when I was going along the road, and they wouldn't let anyone into the factory. Well, that was something I don't think had been taken care of. It hadn't in our factory. Why keep us out? We're there. And if there's any bombing, we got no cover now. We just stand around in the road within 100 yards of the factory. And if there was an alert during working period, we'd all drop tools straight away. Just as you were, you all dropped tools. And I was one of the chief wardens in the works at the time. And it was up to me to see that about 30 people that I worked around, I had to stay in the factory and make sure that they were all under cover. So we used to go underground, and then it got so bad that we're going to the Battle of Britain now anyway, and it would be around the Dunkirk days that this Battle of Britain actually started, or we were getting air raid, you see. And you kept at work until there was imminent danger. He would sound, it was an inside siren. We had an inside siren, and we also, the factories had the public siren for the whole public, because that was a factory. They was able to supply the current and everything, you see, to work these sirens. So, but they were on the outside of the factory, but you could also hear them inside, because in a factory you get all the noise and machinery and commotion going on. So we had our internal warning system as well. So eventually we all stayed at work, and work we did because we'd got to. Everybody was, you know, work yourself to stand still sometimes, you know, working overtime and all that sort of thing, because we got nothing. We've got to build our strength up.
Well, can I interrupt here one moment, please? Ms. West, what did you do whenever there was an air raid warning and Mr. West was at work?
Oh, well.
You would be at home?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, we just put up with it, you know.
Did you
Get
have a
under-
cellar, or did you just
No, we didn't have an
You
air
just sat
raid
there and-
shelter. We just got under the table.
and prayed?
That's where we were when the bomb fell that night. Well, actually, there were 9, weren't there?
Yeah,
No?
6 bombs and 3 fire bombs.
Yes.
Oh,
And,
explosions.
and the bombs just dodged the houses like that, in between the houses. And I think we got nearly the last
It's
one.
almost a miracle then.
It was. I always said it was a
Yeah,
miracle.
actually we did get the last one.
Yes.
It was funny though. I mean, it had its humorous points as well, you know, during the war. For instance, we live on a corner. Now, there are a row of houses down there, they're 2 blocks again, and there were some over the road here. There's 26 houses altogether. The bomb drops in here. It's in my garden because my neighbour's garden run up the back.
Mm-hmm.
When he comes home and sees all the state there on a Sunday evening, it's dark of course and the electric light's gone because the poles and everything were blown up. He said it's all right, he said you can kit with me tonight. See? Because that's in my garden.
Uh-huh.
But his house was as bad as mine. He was out for the time, he was out. He happened to be out with his wife, see what I mean?
Well, one more question, Ms. West. Did you ever grow accustomed to the bombings and the warnings? Did you ever get used to it?
Well, I can't say I got used to it, you know. At the finish, it did really begin to get stale. You know, we got so tired.
The Battle of Britain, what was that? About 6 months did that last? Do you recall?
Yes, easy.
And that's almost every day. You would
Day
hear
and
these
night.
warnings day and night.
Day and night. Was it 90 days and nights?
90 consecutive days and nights we were raided. We was
Yes.
having air raid warnings for 90, irrespective of the weather, for 90 consecutive nights we had air raid warnings. In our village we would be about 1,500 people in those days. It's grown a bit since. And I would estimate that the number of bombs was 1 per head of population. And no one got killed. They'd come down, one night I was out and there's a warning on and well, I'm going away. From this factory business, they started what they call the LTD, and then they formed the local defence volunteers at the fourth part of the war, and then they formed it into a home guard, so we came under military orders from then on. Fortunately, England, well, we've been engaged in war for years, and therefore our men were trained for war. We had, in our village alone, we had at least 6 to 8 retired captains of the army or the navy, and majors and lieutenants and things like that. So when war starts, we had trained men to help us, and they used to come at the public meetings and speak. And eventually they took over. I mean, an army captain, he was captain in the Home Guard. He knew all about discipline and that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he was a naval captain, but he was captain of the Home Guard. And a lieutenant that was in the First World War, he took over as lieutenant to our section. Now, I transferred from the works, which was 4 miles away, from being an air raid warding there, which I was allowed to do because I'm still doing something useful. I joined the Home Guard. When I was working for the works, I had to go in weekends and that and do fire watching periods and things like that. You had things built into the factory with little slits in, and you had to be in there during the warning and alert to see if there's any fire started, you see.
By fire, do you mean
Fire bombs.
firebombs?
Fire bombs.
Were you also concerned about maybe sabotage? Was there ever any thought that...
Well, we had security men.
You were...
Patrolling.
Uh-huh.
Oh yes, patrolling. Yeah.
Well, the Home Guard, was the Home Guard supposed to take care of, like, the village, your Home Guard, in case of invasion? You had a group of civilians
Yes.
who were supposed to fight and try to protect your village in case of invasion.
That's right. More or less paratroopers, you see. That's what we were after, to contain them until
Yes,
the
sir.
army could get there.
Were your commanders in this Home Guard, were they military men?
Not.
Or it was all, the commanders were civilians?
Yes. Oh
On the
yes.
Home Guard. I
Yes,
see.
they were civilians just like I. But we did come under the military.
But there was no one military representative there issuing orders.
No.
I
No.
see.
They would
one
come
other-
and give us lectures on ammunition and gas and things like
Uh-huh.
that.
Did was this Home Guard set up after Dunkirk? Do you remember, or was it during this?
I can't remember, but I would think it was just before Dunkirk, most probably, or about the time. First of all, it was called the LDV. It's the Local Defence Volunteers,
Uh-huh.
and then they got you so they could put you anywhere in the country when they got you trained, and they call it the Home Guard.
Do you remember if there were any age limitations, or was it simply if a man were fit?
If a man was fit, and he wasn't doing something essential to the war effort. Like I
Uh-huh.
was in a factory producing goods, I would have to gone into the army. But somebody has to stay at home and work the factories and things like that.
And the children would have been gathered in one central place
Oh, yes,
to be looked
yes.
out.
Oh,
we
yeah,
got- yes.
yeah, that
We
was
knew
all.
just where we got to take them, you know.
It was organised.
Yes.
It was organised because it was never put into practice. Luckily,
Thank goodness. Luckily, that's
Yeah.
right.
But a lot of our children were evacuated to America.
yes, some went
Yes.
abroad. A lot
Because,
went.
My daughter, Mrs. Harrington, she wanted to come over, you see. She wanted to come. At the technical college where she was, there was a boat to bring them over. So we said, no, if anything happened, well, we'd rather all go together, you
Uh-huh.
see. Well, as it happened, that boat was torpedoed.
Because the evacuation upset a good many families. We weren't in a battle area as such when evacuation started. London was the most important place, you see, and the ports, get the children inland. And of course it was a big upset. The children were torn from their parents and they were put with people that they didn't know, and there was lots of trouble. But you know, we've met some since they've grown up and they still go back to where they were evacuated to if their foster parents are still living and things like that. They made great friends from that, you know. Go down into Wales, which was across the other side of England, which, you know, was well away from the war, and there's a lot of open country there that they could live in.
Do you now? The first child that you had in your home was, you said, 6 years old,
Yes.
I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was brought to me at about 10 o'clock at night, wasn't he?
I don't remember.
Yes, his daddy brought him. He was at
Do you
the
smoke?
militia camp.
I do, but would you like to try? Did you had evidently? I can tell whenever you talk about him, it's with affection. So you didn't have a discipline problem, did you?
No.
No.
I mean, just the usual things a 6-year-old boy would
Yes,
do.
yes.
No.
Did you have any friends that did have discipline problems with the children? Do you know of any cases? Because I have read where, for instance, you may have recalled reading in some of the large manor houses, these old houses with expensive furniture and whatnot, they would put a great many children, in some cases, in them,
Yeah.
and they couldn't control the
No,
children,
well,
and they were
that could
destructive.
be, maybe.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes. Well, it didn't happen just in our area, of course,
No.
but we'd read of it during that time.
Yes, sir.
I think it's understandable. You get a lot
Oh,
of children, they're away from their parents, you know, and they've been sort of shell shocked, bomb shocked and that sort of thing.
Right.
It's like this little boy that we had. You see, he was so scared of bombs because he'd had them
Terrified.
drop them round him, you know, up in London. He was terrified of them, you see.
I think the ones that I hated the most were the landmines.
Landmines.
I just hated them because all you could hear was the parachute swishing over the house, you know,
Like,
and you knew it was coming down and it's going to explode somewhere. That was just this swish, swish. That was terrible.
And I'm sure that frightened the child also a
Yes,
great deal.
that was
Did
terrible.
you didn't have any problems now with him having nightmares maybe on account of the bombings? Do you recall him?
No, I kept him with me. I kept him with me
I
all the
see.
time, and he was good, wasn't he?
mm.
Oh, and well,
Oh, she really mothered him, you know.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Then there wasn't any
Yeah.
problem, such as many people experienced the problem of bedwetting by the children because they had been torn
Maybe,
from their
yes.
parents and
Mm.
put in a strange
mm,
environment.
oh yes.
A lot of times the children, I read in some accounts where the children were used to the noises of the city and the constant
Mm.
activity,
That's right.
and some of them were bored in the country,
Yeah.
and even were frightened by the sounds of owls at night. They'd never heard
Yes,
owls, for
that's right,
instance.
yes.
They'd never seen farm animals.
That's right.
And it alarmed them, especially the young
Yes.
ones.
Yes, but that must have been in the parts where there weren't so many raids, because we didn't miss many nights, did we, of the...
An evacuation area?
It wasn't unless it was an emergency.
Mm.
And then we would, of course, they would have flocked into our village. Everyone was assigned or asked how many you could take of that. It was all taken care of if necessary. But they were training them off from London in particular when the war first started, with little labels on the gas mask with them.
Mm.
No, so we can't really help you on the evacuees much.
Oh, well, anything you say is going to help me. I assure you. Feel free. Anything that you can recall that you think is of interest, don't hesitate. I can use anything. And I have plenty of tape. How old was your daughter?
At the time?
Yes, ma'am.
39, she was born in 24, she'll be 15 when the war started.
I see. And they never suggested that you or your daughter leave? No, in other words, evacuate?
No.
Oh, no, I wouldn't.
You live
I
far
wouldn't
enough
have done.
away from
Yes.
London?
Yeah.
No one in your village evacuated?
No. We all
No.
decided we were going to keep together.
Did the government ever suggest that you evacuate?
No.
No,
No.
no.
No. No.
But we were in direct line to London, weren't we? Every time, direct line.
That's why I was wondering. It seems that the government would have suggested,
Yes.
since you were subjected to so much bombing.
Mm-hmm.
But
Now, I saw a lot of in London, perhaps you're not so much interested, but in London, you know, that people were bombed out, they had no homes, and they were in the underground railways, and they were sleeping down there at night. You've heard of that, I suppose.
no, I haven't.
Oh yes, they claimed their piece of platform, you know, the concrete, and they used to take their bedding down there and go down there every night and sleep down there on concrete.
Do you happen to recall the name of the shelter that was used inside the house that you were talking about?
No, I can't.
Well, that's all right. That's not
Well,
really
I-
necessary. I remember you said the
I-
Anderson shelter.
The Anderson shelter was outside,
Uh-huh.
or was it the inside? Was there a Nissen shelter? There was some member of Parliament bought it out. It was named after him when they suggested having a. It was brought up in the Parliament, and they agreed to have these inside shelters, and it was named after him.
But
Yeah,
you had
yeah.
a table that you got under.
Yes.
We just had an ordinary
Yes.
table and felt pretty safe.
Every time.
We put great faith in our house after October the 5th, 1940, because that is the Sunday night that a bomb dropped in our garden. Now, talking of being bombed, what used to happen, a bomb would drop at night, or the bombs would drop, and there'd be a lot of rumours the next day as to where the bomb dropped. So we got so used to bombs being dropped that we would go outside. We had 3 children in the house at the time, because I also have a son, and there was a wife and a daughter and the evacuee. Well, if I was outside walking around, they could carry on normal, because I would let them know if there's an imminent danger. Otherwise, they would all the while on the alert, you see, so they could relax if we went out. And this particular night, you think you could? I thought I could stand up to a bomb. You know what I mean? Near enough, but you just cannot do it. The plane was coming over, and we didn't know which direction. He was coming from probably France or Belgium. That was the direction it was coming in, and then eventually he must have turned at right angles, and then he came towards us, you see, because he was between us and the Thames when we first heard it. And you have an idea where they are because all the searchlights, there's thousands of searchlights, the whole area is lit up with searchlights. And often you could see the enemy aircraft in the cone of searchlights.
Uh-huh.
And our fighters would be underneath with their little lights flashing, you know.
Uh-huh.
And we've seen the fighters fire right through the enemy with tracer bullets and seen them come down in flames and that sort of thing, you know, men jumping out on paratroops.
Uh-huh. Miss West, you may have noticed this. Did you notice if there was an increase in church attendance after the plane started coming?
Well,
You know how in time of danger,
Yes,
people, they
yes.
change their ways.
yes,
Did you ever notice that?
I think there was, yes.
People who maybe didn't go to church regularly started
Yes,
going to
that's
church
right.
quite often then.
Mm. And people were together more, you know, so all
They
friendly,
buried the old
Yes.
hatreds that they had
Every-
had.
Definitely.
everyone was out to
Sociable.
help
Sociable.
someone else, you know, if it was good.
I read in some instances where people who hadn't spoken to one another for years
That's true.
began to unite
That's
and
true.
pull together.
It's
So
quite
there's
right. It's
Yes.
quite right.
great feeling of unity, a common cause.
The night that we got bombed, it disturbed 126 people. No one was injured, but no one could stay there because he dropped the time bomb at the same time, and that lay there for 12 hours. Now, one man that lived opposite me, he declared there was a bomb come down that didn't go off. And with a bit of luck, the air raid wardens came up, and they found it just beyond the gardens of the houses opposite. They found the hole where it went in. So they evacuated all the houses. Now, when they evacuate the houses, and you have to come out, and it's up to you to find a night's lodging somewhere. Now, they were all dispersed over the village. It's quite a small village. And everybody got shelter. And mostly it lasted for a week because you got no roof, no doors, no windows in your house. And you have to get out, and they have teams of men doing first aid repairs, mobile. They come from anywhere where the bomb dropped so that people could be housed quick. The worst thing, in my opinion, living in those days, was if you lost your house, if you lost your living quarters, you see, in a raid or something, you got nowhere to go because everywhere's crowded. Everybody's crowded. But in an emergency, we're even more crowded because you must help other people and that sort of thing. But I found out that the worst thing during the war was loss of sleep. It hurt you more than bombs or anything else, warnings or anything. If you did not get your sleep, you were not in a fit state to do anything the next day. We organised ourselves, and we must have read it about it probably happening in the papers and in the towns. We organised all the local people, and none them all for being a warden or a home guard, whatever you may be in. We also organised ourselves into fire watching patrols. So we had ladders built, we had loads of sand shot into a certain place, and in our case there were 26 houses just where I lived, and we were issued with 2 stirrup pumps that you could pump water under pressure out of a bucket to deal with an incendiary bomb. You see, because an incendiary bomb may fall in somebody's house, and we could put it out. We were trained for that sort of thing. Oh yes, every village.
You had a fire department, but you also had this group of men who would try to take care of the smaller fires.
Yes, that's
Yes.
Small brigades.
Yes, yes. We were trying to be self-efficient, you know, to in anything that was first aid, do it yourself rather than call in the proper authorities. You see, it got so that people were losing sleep. I mean, an air raid warden, the air raid siren would go, say, 6:30 at night. Perhaps you wouldn't have a bomb all night. But the alert doesn't come till 6:30 next morning, so you're under alert. But London's being bombed, you've got planes overhead, dogfights going on up there and that sort of thing. But the alert is still on, you see. So we found out that it gave people confidence and they were able to sleep. What struck me when this bomb fell in my garden, you know, how everything neat and tidy. I have a nice garden, for instance, you see. Practically every Englishman has a nice garden, and we're practically self-supporting in growing our own vegetables. You see, in those days we were totally we used to produce all our produce because we used to have what they call an allotment. It's a field a farmer would let you have, you'd hire a plot off of him and grow all your own produce. There's none more for going to work. We still did that because we can only produce in those days, I think it was 25% of the essentials that we need. We lived by the sea, and therefore we weren't getting imports. So we dig for victory. That was a slogan. All up there. Dig for victory, dig for victory.
I've seen that one in the newspapers.
Yeah, dig for victory.
Right.
But as I say, what amazed me about the bomb is the mess it makes. You know, everything is neat and tidy, and I'm standing outside, and at least 6 bombs hit the ground, and I'm still able to stand out there. But by the time that one dropped in my garden, I'd run in the back door, and I knew that I wasn't getting. There was a place about 8 feet wide, and I came in the door like there, and there was a table here, and the wife and the children were in another room, closed off. Well, I guess this bomb was coming pretty near, so all I could do was stood near that door, was to run round and come in this door, and I went under the table. But while all the debris was falling and the terrific noise, I knew I wasn't getting damaged because I knew I had something, and my legs weren't covered. So if there was anything falling, I would feel it on my legs, and I hadn't felt anything. And then there's this sudden hush. You hear nothing. Your lights are gone. Everything is in darkness. And then we have brick homes, and a 2-story high. And then you get this smell of mortar and dust and soot from the chimney, because we have coal fires, solid coal. You know, any gust of wind or something, and especially a bomb dropping, of course you've got your soot come down your chimney into the room. It's all over the house. Well, I could smell this, and that gave me the impression that the house must have collapsed, but yet my legs weren't damaged. But they come to me that part of the house must have collapsed, and that's where the wife and children are, in there where the fire. I could smell the soot from that fireplace. There's no fireplace in here. And it went on for several seconds, and nobody said a word. We're in different rooms, and then eventually I called out, and then she said, "I'm all right," and Nan, "Are you all right?" and "Don, you all right?" And the boy was under the sofa like that, and it came up so hard it hurt his back, but not terrific. But it was a concussion of the floor coming up and hurting his back. Now it blew me, what we call a front door. We had to go upstairs. It took that door, and not only the door, it took the doorpost as well, right into brickwork, and blew it right up the stairs. You see, in those days they were dropping penetrating bombs, which was good for us, and they penetrated so deep that the most damage come from the debris that had come out of the bomb hole. I mean, there were chunks of earth weighing up to 2 tons lying in my yard and on my garden. You see, and when you come out, everything was so tight, and you can't move, you can't get out the door. There's huge chunks of earth lay there.
How long did it take you to clean things up?
Weeks. All the winter. All
you
the
had
winter.
to fill up the big hole.
Well,
in your garden.
I was lucky. It fell as near to the road as it did my house, and therefore the roadman came along, and they had to get rid of that earth, and they had to put it back in my hole. See, it lowered my garden about 3 inches eventually. I didn't get it all back, because it scattered into other people's gardens. A lot of them brought it back over the winter.
He was inside when it hit.
I was inside when it dropped.
Oh, but you never knew that you never thought, my God, he's outside?
No, I knew he.
Oh, you knew he had come in.
Yes, because he said, "There's one coming." Down, he said. So down we went under the table, and that was the one.
You see, unless I gave a warning, they could carry on in the house as if there wasn't an alert on them. While I was out there, I just give them a warning, you see, look out or something like that, take cover and things like that, you see. So they felt pretty safe. There was an incident one night, we was out fire watching, it was this patrol that I told you that we formed between ourselves. And there was a plane going over, and I thought to myself, and I said to my fire watching friend, I said, if he drops anything now, we are okay. Because we watched the cone of searchlights. Although he wasn't in the searchlights, they're pretty near, you know, so you know where the plane is. And he'd gone beyond, he was coming, say, from France or Belgium, and he was going towards London. So obviously I should think the plane come from Belgium or perhaps Holland. and he was taking that direction towards Hunter. And I said, if he drops anything now, Joe, his name was, my fire-watching friend, I said, well, we'll be all right. And within a second, they were, the bombs are falling. Now, there's also a lot of controversy next morning. Where did the bombs fall last night? Well, I knew the plane was beyond me, and my partner falls in, he jumps head first into a ditch of water. There's a big tree, then he goes right in, I hear the splash, and I thought, my God, my pretty good in egg was we're safe. And before those bombs got to the ground, I was next to it. And I had no intention of going in there at all.
You followed him, right?
I followed him in, and neither of us knew where the bombs got.
Oh.
But it so happened they dropped about 2 miles away cross country, and they injured a little girl, and she's the only one, I think, in the village that got injured by a bomb. What's a girl Baines? It hit her in the elbow, and she still gets a few shillings a week pension from that now, from the government.
You mentioned a while ago that there were a few humorous incidents in the war. One that I've read about in the London Times, I've gone through the London Times several times looking for information, is did you have a pub in your
Yes.
Oh,
village?
yes,
Yes.
Three.
Three? Well, there was a certain temperance movement to close down the pubs in the war. Did you have that in your village? Some people thought that men shouldn't be drinking, during the war and that type of thing, but yet the pub seemed to be a great congregating place for men to go and discuss the war.
Yes, no, I don't think we had any. I never heard of any anti-pub movement, not that I remember. It couldn't be very strong because I'm sure I would have been against it.
A gathering place, exchange news about what's going
Yeah,
on
that's
in the
right.
village.
Yeah, that's
And,
right.
and the best friends we made in that pub were Americans.
Is that right?
Yes, that's where we met them, wasn't it?
Yeah. Because this is beyond your story now. But
Well, that's all right. I find it interesting. I don't
Yeah.
mind
The
at
Americans
all.
came, I think, in 1943, the latter end. There's an incident there. The Americans come over and they started ringing us with airfields, about spaced every 5 or 6 miles. So it might be Cyprus, Promsol, Plucherville, the next village here. We were absolutely surrounded. Anyway, they made the airfields and they took off from there the next year. In 1944 they started flying, I think. Now when they first came to the airfield at Willingar, that's a tourist village really, because there's 2 churches in 1 yard. Willingar. 2 churches stand side by side. There was some feud between some nurses years ago, and one said the other
Two
one.
sisters, wasn't it?
Yes, they wanted they both wanted the church built. That they wanted, each wanted a different design, so they built their own church,
Yes.
and that's how it goes.
Oh, we said the Yanks are here. that was. We felt from then on, we were getting along.
Uh-huh.
We were really getting depressed until they got there, weren't we? It was getting us down.
Well, it was going on.
Yeah.
We were getting nowhere.
No.
You see, we were having setbacks all over Africa,
Yeah.
North Africa, in Italy, or Mediterranean. We had that event, the Arnhem. You read of Arnhem in Holland? I was going back into work one day, 1:15, and I came at them, we call it the canteen, where you have your meals. And it was about a 300-yard walk back to the works. And when we came out there, there was no alert on, so they were ours. And the air was loaded with aircraft and gliders. I'd never seen such a sight. There were masses of them. And because they were travelling slow, because they were, the aircraft themselves were loaded with paratroops and the gliders were loaded. A big transport aircraft, and they had a glider on each side of them.
You mentioned something about the church a while ago, and I'd like to ask you this. Now, are you Anglican?
Yeah.
Is that your religion? Do you recall the general feeling of, let's say, your community, the men you talked to, their feelings toward the German people? Was there a general feeling, and then your personal feelings too? I'd like to know how you felt about the German people and what you think the
Yeah.
general opinion, and also yours too, Ms. Mist.
The
What do
only
you
good,
think about the German
the
people?
only good German is a dead one.
That's the way you felt.
That's the way I felt.
I
I mean, this has been my second war. I remember the first war.
Yeah,
I remember the Zeppelins and all that sort of thing
Right.
coming over. Yes.
And what about Hitler? What did you think of Hitler?
Well, monstrous, wasn't he? He was a monster.
And you feel
Oh,
basically
yeah.
the same?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And did your minister in the church, what do you call him? The parson?
Parson.
Did he try to tell the people you shouldn't hate the Germans or this type of thing? Do you remember? anything?
No, he didn't.
No.
I tried to.
In those days, we had, he would been Mr. Carroll, wouldn't it? And he was very elderly, and I don't think. Yeah, I think it may be same in America, but the average Britisher will follow his course. You know, I mean, what he thinks,
Mhm.
and especially like I have set ways now at my age. I'm nearly 70, see, and I have set ways, and I'll keep those ways, I think. And I'm pretty sure the vicar, he was set in his way that he was used to, and he wouldn't condemn. He wouldn't condemn anyone. If Germans had have dropped, I mean, anyone would have had a go at them. I mean, when the local defence volunteers was first formed, all you had was a fork or something, and we were told that paratroops might be dropping any time, and people would have used them. Oh, I mean, what use would that mean? But they'd have had a go.
One other thing I'd like to ask that you mentioned a while ago, you said that sometimes you would see the planes coming over and you wouldn't hear the siren, so you knew they were ours.
Yeah.
You know, they were
Mm.
British or American Allied planes.
Yeah.
Was there ever a case that you remember where a German plane got through and the warning failed to
And
be
drop
sounded?
bombs.
Yes.
And drop bombs.
Did it happen more than once? Quite a few times?
Oh, it must have happened numerous of times. That's what they call come hedge hopping.
Yes.
Oh, you mean low?
Yeah.
Be very low?
Yeah. No alert.
Ah,
Oh, yeah.
Under the radar. Well, they didn't have a radar at the
No.
first part of the war, did they?
No.
Simply lookouts.
That's
kind of
right.
thing.
Had the barrage balloons, you know,
That's
huge.
something. I wish you could explain that to me. The balloons. What
Well,
was
they
their
were-
function?
Oh, they stop low-flying aircraft. Otherwise, they can come down and pack. Well, we had them in over Chelmsford itself. You don't want them.
I don't know if I do. I find them quite good.
London was ringed with them.
Were they
They were
tied to the ground?
Oh yes, tethered to the ground.
Great
Yes.
long balloons, they
Yeah, barrage balloons.
Barrage.
They're more like a banana shape.
were. Yes.
No, there weren't any men on these.
Oh no,
Oh, no.
oh no. That was only to
How
stop.
high were they?
Oh.
I mean, roughly, approximately.
Oh, approximately. They were various heights. I would imagine
Uh-huh.
from 4,000 feet or something, like that, 1 to
They would be
3,000.
tied down. And
Oh yes, there'd be
4,000
anchored,
feet?
plenty of anchors, because once they broke loose, which they did sometimes, our fighters had to go around and shoot them down, and that was a deuce of a job.
They were as big as maybe this room.
Oh, as long as this room, longer than
Longer
this
than
room.
this, as
Oh,
long
yeah.
as the house I would imagine.
And the purpose was to prevent the planes from coming in very low.
Yes.
Oh yes, they would dive bomb or strike you with bullets.
Was it a buzz bomber?
The V1,
The doodle bug.
we called it that doodle bug.
I don't know if I mean the B1. Maybe I'm talking about the wrong thing. Was there
There's
some
the
type
V1,
of...
the V1 and the V2,
Yeah,
One was a
I remember
rocket.
those.
and one was a jet-propelled unmanned aircraft.
But wasn't there some type of manned aircraft that, I may have used the wrong word, buzz bomb, a dive bomber that would come diving down and make a tremendous amount of noise? Or maybe I'm thinking of something wrong. And frighten the people? I'll find out the name of it. I'm sure you'll know what I'm
It's
talking
probably
about.
it could be a German Stuka. I think they used to use them a bit for,
And
that I-
terrorize the
yes.
public.
but I don't think they were used in Europe. although of course England is in Europe, but we
Yeah.
talk of
The
Europe as
mainland.
another continent.
It's tremendous. So that would be a different thing.
But we were quite used to low-flying aircraft because within cross-country, I should think 8 to 9 miles, we had one of the main defence airfields of London called North Weald in Essex. And that's where the Battle of Britain was fought, from North Weald, Hornchurch, and somewhere in Kent, Biggin Hill, and one or two other places. But mainly, I think one of the main airfields was in about 9 miles of where I live, North Weald. And they had this militia camp, I think it was about half to 3/4 of a mile from where I live. And of course I had these conscript young soldiers there, and they used to come over and manoeuvre with these camps. The fighters, there'd be a whole squadron up there, and grad they'd peel off and they'd come in one by one, and they'd go sort of to dive bomb and strafe the camp. It was part of the training of the airmen, I think, and part of to get the troops in this camp used to low-flying aircraft.
Miss West, did you find after the war had started, in the early months of the war that I'm interested in, did you find that you had to, let's say, change your menu a great deal? In other words, was there a scarcity of the foods that you had been accustomed to using?
Oh yes, because you see we were allowed a few ounces of sugar, a few ounces of butter a head. You see, it went down to ounces. I can't think now how many, about...
Well, probably you might have 2 ounces of butter a week.
Yeah.
Well, did your grocer have a list of names? with
We
your
had,
names?
we
had a
had
book.
the
Ration books.
ration books, you see,
Uh-huh.
and you couldn't get
Where did you go to get your ration books?
to the grocery. Oh, the ration books.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, they sent to us.
But they was all posted
Yes.
to us.
I see.
Mm.
Before the war started, we was all prepared for that.
And you could
Yeah.
not hoard food, right? I mean, in other words, you couldn't save up your coupons and buy a lot of, let's say, sugar at one time.
Oh no, it
no.
wasn't enough. You know, we didn't get enough.
You were only allowed so much per week.
That's all. And the same with clothes.
So, in
Yeah.
other words, you had to change your eating habits drastically.
Oh yes,
Oh
yes.
yes.
Mainly self-supporting in the vegetable line, so you can
that
you
helps.
can do without meat.
Was there a
That-
significant drop in meat?
Oh, definitely. Well, I came over in '49, and meat rationing was still on in England, and I came over on an American boat, the United States, and I had some beef on that boat. Well, I hadn't seen since before the war.
That's right.
You hadn't eaten beef since before the war?
The large portions they were dishing out, you know.
Well, what type of meat did you eat mainly? Lamb or
We had to have the cheapest that we
Pig?
could get, you see.
Yes, lamb and pork,
bacon? I think you call it
Yeah.
mutton. Is mutton a meat?
mutton, sheep. Sheep. Well, you see, we weren't importing all that amount. We couldn't, well, see, lots of our meat, and it still does, comes from New Zealand. Well, that was a long way to transport it, and we certainly didn't control the seas in those days,
Mm-hmm.
you see. Before the war, Britain ruled the waves.
Right.
I mean, we had a great navy, great traditions, great men. But the Germans see that with submarines, and of course we were supplying Russia, and we were having to escort supply ships right round to Russia during the war, and hoping, and I don't know, but if you've probably read of it, I would go as low as to say that only 10% got through sometimes, which means to say that if you've got 100 ships in the convoy, you're hoping to get 10 through.
But fortunately, later on, I know I've read some of Mr. Churchill's speeches. It got to where almost all of the convoys made it with the escorts and whatnot. It got much better later on.
Yes, well, we had aircraft overhead as well. We had aircraft carriers. You see, at one time, you see, we'd lost so many merchant ships, fast-moving merchant ships, that we had to call on anything that would float to load up to take somewhere, and it had to be escorted. And the convoy couldn't move only as fast as the slowest ship.
Ah,
So we were a sitting target for enemy aircraft and of course submarines. That was why.
one other thing about this food business, could you estimate about how often you did get meat after the ration started? Maybe once a day or twice a week?
Oh, well, you could eat at one meal what you got in a week.
Yes.
You could eat it in one meal, definitely. Oh,
Well,
yeah.
Could you give me an idea of what your supper consisted of? It was all vegetable food?
Oh, yes, it had to be all vegetables.
Mainly vegetables. Of
What,
course,
too?
you could get some tinned meat.
What is that?
You
Canned.
call it canned meat.
Would it be beef?
Like corned beef
No.
or spam or...
Oh, spam or
If
something
you could
like
get it. I mean, I don't think that was rationed, was it?
I would imagine any meat
I
that was
can't
rationed.
remember.
You see, the American, there was food coming in from canned food, quite a bit of it coming in from America towards the latter end of the war, but I can't quite, but I would imagine it was still rationed. You probably get a little bit more of it, but it was still rationed.
So you ate potatoes, beans, peas,
Oh, yes.
that type of thing?
Yeah.
Cabbages and...
What
Yeah.
about milk? Was milk hard to come by?
Yes, it was fairly scarce because we couldn't import the feeding stuffs. We could only feed what we had in the country, and so the stock went down considerably.
Oh, I see.
But children were provided for when they had special coupons.
Mm.
So they tried to make sure that the children got
Oh,
enough
yes,
milk.
Yes.
yes, yes.
Well, were eggs, now this is another high protein food like meat, so were eggs scarce also? Did you have trouble?
Well, no, because people had their own chickens,
Well,
you see.
you had your own
we
chickens
we
too?
were
Yeah.
keeping chickens at that time, yes.
Oh,
Mhm.
that's good. What about goat's milk? They didn't, people didn't use goat's milk much?
There's not many goats around there.
There were a few goats, but you know,
Not enough.
not enough to know.
Well, look, I don't want to tire you.
No, go ahead. That's all right. You know.
Well, okay, just a couple of more questions then
Mhm.
about some of the things. What about the blackout? Was it a great inconvenience for you?
Oh,
The lights, as soon as it became dark, the lights went out?
6 years and not a street light.
no. And you were fined if there happened to be just the curtain not pulled down properly, you know, a gap, you were fined. Or the warden would be round there, if he could get there personally, he'd tell you, but otherwise you could have been fined for that.
You put your blackout up at night and then go out and look and make sure that there was no showing whatever, which to me seemed ridiculous because aircraft can't spot lights from windows like that. I mean, I've learnt that since because I've flown Atlantic several times, you know, across here and that. But and they were flying at a pretty good height. They were above the anti-aircraft most of the time, see. But I could see the...
You mean a part in the curtain they couldn't have seen?
But they've come under as a door there now, and if it was real dark, a light was shown under that door. I don't say that there's a little light, but if there was a quarter of an inch there and a warden went by and he saw a light, he'd come and tell you about it.
You get a knock on the door.
Now, I realised why this was, because if he went to the next house and said, look, you've got a kink of lightning there, or what about that one over there? And I said nothing to him, so you had to have a blackout. You see, otherwise people might just take an advantage of it. A blackout is a blackout, and it was a blackout.
It was terrible.
Did you ever hear any of your friends or in the pub perhaps people complaining because the blackout started as soon as the war began, right? September 3rd, I believe you said. And actually, there weren't many bombings for 6 or 8 months. Did people start to become irritated at this and complain a bit?
Well, no. As far as I can recollect, no, because it was there all the time. You see, Germany was at the coast of France and Belgium. They could come over
The danger
anytime.
appeared real.
Yes, Oh yes, definitely. Oh yes, you wouldn't
So
show a
they did.
light. Even to strike a match to light a cigarette or something like that, people put it under the coat.
Well, did you have a cinema in your village?
No.
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 But they did close the cinemas for a while, didn't they? I believe as part of the blackout. And
Well, yeah, oh yes, or they would clear them on an alert.
I think this irritated some people
Oh
a
yes,
bit.
yes.
Because they said we have all these restrictions, but there are no planes. And the people began to be upset about this a bit. Did the blackout change your sleeping habits? Did you start going to bed earlier or anything like that?
Oh, you couldn't, you see. You couldn't because the raids coming along. You never sort of went to bed early. You went to bed any time, morning hours or midnight, anything, any time.
You see, we'd get up on an alert. I mean, you could have an alert because London's being bombed, and we were quite near London, you see. So the spotters, we had observation posts about, I don't know where they were, of course, but they were on the coast and on various buildings. And once an aircraft approached a certain area, he would warn the surrounding districts that danger was imminent, and they would sound a siren. Because, as I say, you'd get the siren, say if it was dark at 5, you get the siren at 5, and it's there until daylight next morning.
Before they all clear.
Yeah, that's right. But you may not have anything drop in your area, but the alert is on, the planes are overhead, the searchlight is on, the anti-aircraft fire is going. That was another thing when the war first started. It was inside one night under the table, and it seemed that everything was in chaos around us. There was bangs and explosions all over the place. You expect to get up and find devastation, you know. But when we went out, apparently there was some mobile anti-aircraft guns that stopped in the locality, and there were some aircraft, and they were just firing at those. But you see, you're inside, you don't know what's happening, you just hear the explosion. But they didn't last long, but it happened a few times, and people were really frightened.
And this, as you said earlier, this day after day, night after night, began to depress the people a great deal. I can imagine destruction, constant. It seems as though there's no end to it.
That's right, that's right.
There's no tomorrow. You see, you've got to live for today.
Live for today, you see.
You know, this is off the subject, but I teach at Northwestern, the college in Natchitoches, and the students complain a great deal about what's wrong with the country and this type of thing. You know, students upset about, they don't like this about the United States. And I tell them, you don't have any idea, and I tell them I don't either, but you have no idea how thankful you should be, because this country has never been subjected to war. I said, if you would just read about what people have had to go through before, such as England, World War I and World War II within, 20 years of one another, the hardship and the sacrifice. And young people just aren't appreciative. They don't realize how fortunate they are. And I'm afraid, I've read some accounts from students in Europe and England, different places, and they're forgetting the war too. The younger generation, they don't realize what the older people have had to go through.
No.
And I think this is a shame. I almost feel that as part of their schooling, children should be made to study World War II and what people went through, so that they can appreciate what they have.
Then, of course, to read of it, it's not interesting for me to read anything of the war, you know. You've got your own experience. You can't, I don't think you can put it down in print, you know, your feelings, the hardships and everything that you have to endure.
Well, that's what I tried to tell them. They have no idea. They could never imagine how fortunate. One other thing about food I wanted to ask you. Did you notice in the early part of the war a significant increase in the price of food? Or, well, you didn't spend money for the food. Well, you had to buy your coupons, didn't you? Is that right?
Oh, no, they were issued by the government.
Coupons.
Well, you did have to spend money on food, though.
Oh, yes, you had to buy the food, but you had to give these coupons for it.
I see now. Right, I see now.
There's a little book that you see, and it might go for a month or 3 months, and you might have as many as 8 coupons on there, and may go 8 weeks, so you tear it off and get 2 ounces of sugar or butter or something like that.
Did you notice much of that? For instance, the price of something may double?
No, not a terrible lot.
No,
That's surprising.
only in the black market. Eventually food got onto the black market and various things, and if you had the money and you knew the right people, you could get a little of it. I think it happens every time in trouble, in black market, you do get a little. There's just one other thing. Now, about church bells, they were silenced. As soon as war was declared, not one church bell was rung until war was over, in 6 years.
Why was that?
Because it was a sign, if you heard a church bell, the enemies invaded England.
Oh.
Now that's definite. So there was not a church bell sounded from the day war was declared until war was over.
I bet they rang the day war was
Oh,
over.
did that? Oh, that's pretty.
The air was vibrating with them.
Beautiful.
The bell was ringing.
Oh, it must have been a great
People were
feeling.
jumping for joy, you know. Well, there's an incident I can remember. In 1918, the war finished on November 11th, so the armistice was signed. And I was working about 3 miles from where I live now. Anyway, I was quite young then. When would I be? 1918. I'd be 15. And of course, the only transport about was cycling in those days. So we left off work. I was working because I started work when I was 14. And several of us young people, we got together and we went into Chelmsford. And during the First World War, the prisoners were made to work and help the war effort because we took a tremendous amount of prisoners of war. And they used to come and work on local farms. They used to come by rail or by big trucks to Chelmsford, and then the farmers would go in each day with a horse and cart, because there's no lorries much that day, only what the government had, and they'd pick up so many prisoners and take them for the day. Then they'd have a guard with them, there'd be a soldier guarding them, you know. Well, on Armistice Day, it was pitiful really for the German point of view, but the horses, you know, they're in harness and that sort of thing, and they're in these just 2-wheel carts, you might have 6 or 8 men in there. Well, the men just stopped the horses and the lads and let them have a game with them, you know, and unharnessed the horse and tipped the cart up, prisoners and all that in the road. Germans. The war was over. That was easy.
Oh, I think they just went crazy, you know, when it was over. And then you
After what, 6 years
Yeah.
or 5 years? 6 years,
Well,
huh?
that was 4 years, the first one.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the First World
Yeah,
War. We didn't see any prisoners, or many, not during the last war. I don't know. We didn't take many, did we,
They did work
Philippines?
on the farms, the prisoners.
Yeah, there were a few, but we didn't take many prisoners. You see,
Some
because
English girls married them,
Married the prisoner?
the prisoners,
Mm.
and they stayed in England. Yeah.
You didn't have any foreigners living in your village at the outbreak of the war, did you? That the government came and
Yeah.
checked out?
Yeah, they were checked out before then. Yes. It's funny, I was working with a student at the time. I had a student working with me as an apprentice in this electrical factory where I was working, and there was a German there, and I think he was 24 years old. This was when the war started. Now we had to get 20 miles from the coast in case of invasion, see?
He had to live 20 miles?
Yes, he couldn't live at Chelmsford because that's less than 20 miles from the coast. But it put him up in London somewhere. He went and lived up in London.
He stayed there the whole war?
Oh, no, I lost trace of him after that.
But I mean, if
He
he
had to-
wanted to, they would have allowed him to, as long as he didn't
Oh,
engage in
yes,
you know,
oh, yes,
illegal
yes.
activities.
But he's an alien, and they check up every so often. You have to report every so often.
Did you know any of, at the outbreak of the war, they released many prisoners, people who were in jail for drunkenness or whatever?
I don't
Did
know.
You know
I don't know of anything. I don't remember. I don't think we did.
I think anyone with less than a 90-day sentence for minor offenses, they were released. Of course, people who had committed serious offenses were.
They might have done. I don't remember.
Uh-huh. Did you have an inn or a hotel in your village?
Three. We got 3 inns.
The
Three.
inns.
Public
Inn,
house.
just
Yes.
now, or
Public
hotel,
houses.
so public houses?
Yes.
Were any of those, what do they call it, commandeered, taken over by the government? There was a great deal of this throughout the country.
No.
Where the government would take, did you
Oh,
know, experience?
Oh, I know houses being taken over and put to military use,
Uh-huh.
especially when the war first started, because searchlight crews were stationed. You see, we were surrounded by searchlights. Well,
Right.
they would commandeer, take over a big house somewhere, and they would live in there. You see.
But the residents of the house, would they stay there also, or were they forced to move somewhere else? Do you recall?
I don't think they'd force them to move. There's one case in particular, the Hickory. Who was that now? Because that airman used to come to our place a lot, didn't he?
Oh, yes. And the people were still in there, weren't
Yeah, I
they?
think they allowed the people to keep, say, 2 rooms,
Mm.
and they'd have the rest of the house.
And do you recall if they compensated the family for this in any way?
Oh,
with
yes.
money?
I'm pretty sure they did. I'm pretty sure they did, yes. They'd have rooms for fire service and things like that. They would, if it wasn't offered, they would just commandeer one somewhere. But mainly, I think they were offered. And somebody said, you can use my room or something like that. They probably got something out of it.
The fireman had one room at the pub.
Yeah,
didn't
the
they?
firemen had to, and the wardens had a room.
Yes.
You know, we was all issued with an identity number during the war. Everyone had an identity number. And it's still used for medical purposes now because, you know, we have socialised medicine, they call
Yes.
it. And if I want my glasses changed, they'll ask me my identification number. It still works on that. And I think it does with dentures, doesn't it? You just said something with dentures.
They didn't ask me.
No, well, that's one item I know, where they still use that, because I remember my number was DDFB 56-1, and then it'd be 56-2, and the girl 56-3, and the boy 56-4.
You say the boy, you're talking
I
about
have
the
a
son.
son.
Oh, I didn't know you had a son
Yeah.
too.
Oh, yeah.
I thought you were referring to the baby who was with you.
Oh no, we have a son. He's 4 years younger than the daughter. He was born in 28.
Well, now, during this period, you had to carry a gas mask with you everywhere
Yes,
you went. didn't you?
at the start of the war. Yes.
Uh-huh. Did you even had them for your daughter and your son?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Anytime they left the house, you made
Yeah.
sure.
Oh, they had to take-
Everybody had to carry one.
Yeah, the-
Even if you went down to the grocer, to
Yeah.
the grocery store, you
Yes,
carried it
everywhere
everywhere.
you went.
Yeah. You see, there couldn't be any let up because they might be taken in an emergency. You see.
Mhm.
There might be an
In
emergency.
church, everyone would be
Yeah.
sitting
Oh,
there with their
yes.
gas
Mhm.
mask.
Yes. Yeah, for instance here, when I was in the Home Guard, we used to have lectures because they kept bringing fresh gases out in these warring nations. And there's one particular gas, I think they call it phosgene gas, and it was terrible if it got on your lungs. And we had this lecture one night, and we were issued with army type gas masks in those days because I was more or less in the army as a home guard, you see, so we had their equipment and a steel helmet. We were issued a steel helmet. And it was funny, you could go onto this gas mask lecture, when I come out, you know, the air's full of phosgene gas, you can smell it.
Just talking about it.
Yeah, just talking about it, you know, it's so horrible. And they give you pictures of it, what's happened to people and things like that on these demonstrations, you know. And when you leave the meeting, you know, you fancy you're in it. You really taste it's horrible. You see, you've just learnt all the horrors of it, you know. Because they didn't use any, did they?
No, not as
that
far
we
as I know they did.
Not that we know of.
No.
I tell you what we used to get a lot of, you know, the tin foil, you call it tin foil? You know,
Uh-huh.
this tin foil,
Yes, sir.
and it would be silver colour. Well, when I think it was something to do with radar. Radar was discovered full part of the war, and the German aircraft used to come over and drop this in little strips, and the whole air would be loaded with it, upset the communications.
Diffuse
And we
radar.
We used to get a lot of that. Pick that up. Yeah.
And then the black skies after the bombing of the oil tanks, there'd be just like big black rag in the sky, wasn't it? Coming over the house.
You know,
Just
London.
darkened everywhere. From the oil tanks, they bombed them. How many nights? 5 nights?
Oh, no, that went on for weeks or not. But the Thames, you know, London stands on the Thames, and I'm about 20 miles on the north bank, from the north bank of the Thames. And when there's no doubt the Germans used a strategy when they started the Battle of Britain. First of all, they went for oil installations, I think, mainly, and warehouses, and they did tremendous amount of damage all up the Thames. There's all ports all the way up the Thames, and they set oil tanks afire, and they were burning for days, and big grain stores, food, you see what I mean? And they had a method, and they worked that way. It was quite late. Then London was severely bombed, and then they did start to terrorise the population, or they appeared to be doing that, when they started to loose bombs in our area and that sort of thing. They had various stages, you know, of this bombing phase. And when you look back, you can, you know, it's what really happened. Well, it's the only way you can tell when you look back and see the various stages of the bomb, you see. But you would get up in a clear morning, and you could, from 20 miles, and there'd be nothing but smoke on the horizon coming from the oil tanks blowing all along the sky, and it'd be day after day. All these oil tanks were going up.
And they used to ask us to go out and collect all the glass and the bones that we could collect for the bombs.
Salvage?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's something else I want to ask you about later.
Salvage was
about the salvage
everything.
program.
Everything. Didn't throw anything away.
No.
Couldn't.
One other thing I want to ask you in particular, before I forget, is due to the war, did you find that clothing or cloth was hard to come by? In other words, did you have to dress your daughter in the same clothes?
Oh yes, because we were rationed.
And little girls, young girls, hate
yeah.
that, I imagine. They
Oh,
like pretty
yeah,
clothes.
Well, you
No.
couldn't get them. You could. When my daughter married, we were still coupons, wasn't it? And she had to borrow her wedding dress and the veil because she hadn't the coupons to buy anything. And I hadn't any. I had to go in the same clothes that I wore every day.
Did you notice, even at the beginning of the war, that cloth was starting to be rationed or hard to come by?
Oh, yeah.
Even at the beginning.
Oh, we
Of
had
course,
to,
to a man, it doesn't make that much
No.
difference, but to the ladies, it's quite
yes,
important.
we had to patch and
Plus,
wear and yes.
plus you have an old dress, and then you have this gas mask
Yeah.
alongside of it.
Yeah.
Doesn't look too nice, I
Oh,
don't
you
suppose.
couldn't have nice clothes.
What about makeup? Was there a scarcity of makeup?
Yes.
No.
But then you hadn't the time to put it on, so it didn't matter.
Very few people wore it.
No.
I suppose jewelry and those type of things, you couldn't obtain jewelry, I would imagine.
Luxury was out.
Yes.
Definitely.
luxury.
Clamped down on all luxury. Anything
Watches
luxury.
even, would you say?
Well, no, I think you could get.
You
could
can always get a
there.
watch if you need it.
Yes. But anything luxurious, no, it just wasn't there. You're talking of clothes, and clothes deteriorated during the war. They got these because they're still making man-made fibres, but that's when they started, didn't it, during the war, these man-made fibres, that sort of thing. We were getting utility stuff, and it said utilities. If they could make something and cut a quarter of an inch off around that collar, you see, it saved material and all that sort of thing. One less button.
Right.
You see, no double cuffs and things like that. It was all utility stuff, and it was marked utility.
But there was enough coarse cloth, I'm not going to call it, to at least keep you properly clothed, but there wasn't anything luxurious or pretty.
No change in the fashion. No, they deteriorated more than anything. You know that they went to save material.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, look, I don't want to tire you. I've been at this bothering you now for about an hour and a half. If you don't mind, I'd like to stop now